So in today's video, we're essentially going to be talking about why Capcom was basically non-existent at the Nintendo Switch 2 Direct. Now, if you guys have watched the Direct, Capcom, the only thing that they essentially did was they showcased Kunitsugami, and as well as, what is the other game? They showcased Street Fighter 6, and that's about it. Honestly, I was kind of disappointed that Capcom didn't kind of take an opportunity to showcase more of the Resident Evil games. Now, the reason I thought that this was basically super strange was because Capcom 3 years ago, in 2022, they did actually release an article basically stating their plans for the future of Resident Evil. And in the plans, they did state that they wanted Resident Evil to be in more systems. So, and sure enough, to be fair, that's what Capcom has essentially done in the 3 years since then, right? I mean, we've had recently the GOG release of Resident Evil 1, 2, and 3 OG. And also on top of that, I guess this is kind of a side tangent, but we also got Dino Crisis 1 and 2. And kind of weirdly enough, they did put Dino Crisis 1 on PS5, but not Dino Crisis 2. So I guess we're all waiting for that. But anyways, going back to what I was saying, it's really strange that Capcom didn't take the opportunity to kind of showcase more. Another thing to note as well is that Capcom did release Resident Evil 2, Resident Evil 3 Remake, and Resident Evil 7 in in the Switch, but they were specifically cloud versions. On top of that, Capcom was also working on, the mobile games for Resident Evil 3, 2, and 7. So I find it a bit strange that we didn't get anything for the Nintendo Direct. Like, what's happening here, Capcom? Like, Capcom's putting all this money, all this attention to porting their games to freaking like your iPhone, but nothing for the Switch 2. That was kind of trippy. Like, I ain't gonna lie. Now, I do have a theory as to what the reason is as to why Capcom didn't do this, and that's what we're going to be going over that. And it's also worth noting that my theories do tend to be correct, but again, this is speculation, but I do have a good track record. Like, one of my top theories is that I did theorize that Ethan was going to die in Resident Evil 8. On top of that, I also theorized that the dog in Resident Evil 4 Remake was not dead, because Capcom was kind of showcasing it. If we remember back in 2023, they did kind of showcase that the dog was going to be dead. But anyways, I was like, nah, Capcom's capping, bro. They're like completely capping. So what's interesting though, going back to what I'm saying today, is that it's really strange that Capcom didn't showcase anything. They didn't showcase nothing, bro. Just Street Fighter 6 and Kunitsugami. Like, that's weird. You know what I mean? I guess another counter argument as to why Capcom did this could be that Resident Evil 2, 3, and 7, if you guys remember, just a couple years ago, like around 2 years ago, they did have like a PS5 update. And in the PS5 update, they did kind of give ray tracing and all of that. And the company that worked on that was actually the same company that worked for Silent Hill, that the same developers that are working on Silent Hill F. So those are the guys that kind of ported everything to have ray tracing and higher frame rates for the PS5 and Xbox Series X and S or whatever. So it could be that the reason why, Capcom didn't showcase Resident Evil 2, 3, and 7 for the Nintendo Switch 2 could be because, the same team that worked on the other ports are busy right now. You know what I mean? With Silent Hill F that's releasing this year. So that could be a logical possibility as to why we didn't get anything, right? Because it's kind of weird. Like, even before the Nintendo Switch 2 Direct, a lot of Resident Evil fans on Twitter were super excited. They were like, bro, we could play freaking Resident Evil 2 on the go, Resident Evil 3, because, Resident Evil 7, whatever, Resident Evil 4, everything. Because, as mentioned, the ones that released for Switch, they were only cloud-based. And correct me if I'm wrong, guys, let me know how those ports ended up working. I've heard mixed kind of reviews on that. I've heard some people say that it runs good. I've heard other people say that it kind of sucked. You know what I mean? Like, it's not the best. So I don't know. Like, I don't have a Switch. Now, Edgewix actually brings up a good point here. He states that, aren't you a Capcom employee? No, I am not a Capcom employee. I'm just part of the Capcom USA creators. So that's more of like a creator program where Capcom gives me free stuff. You know what I mean? They'll give me free games, all of their games like 1 day before they give me that. Or sometimes they also give like exclusive looks like 2 weeks before the release of a game. But it's worth noting that no, I don't get like a sneak peek. That's not how Capcom Creators works. They don't tell me anything. I'm not leaking anything here. You know what I mean? Like, that's not how Capcom Creators works. But just so you guys know, it wouldn't really make sense for Capcom to kind of go back on what they said 3 years ago, for them to put as many Resident Evil games and as many platforms as possible so that more people can enjoy them. That would be kind of weird if they didn't do that, and if they just didn't post any games for the Switch 2. Like that would be weird, you know what I mean, if that ends up happening. But the other possible outcome is that Capcom is actually just busy working on new titles for Resident Evil. If you guys remember, in 2020, there was that actual Capcom data breach that occurred where a bunch of their games got released. And that's actually how we knew that RE4 Remake was in the works way before Capcom actually released like an official announcement. On top of RE4 Remake being leaked, we also got 3 other games that have still not released. For starters, we got Resident Evil Outrage, Resident Evil Hunker, which is Hunk, and Resident Evil Apocalypse. And a lot of people during that time when Resident Evil Apocalypse was actually written there, a lot of people kind of put 2 and 2 together and assumed that that was Resident Evil 9, but there was no confirmation to that. On top of all of this information, I guess the latest news that we got was a year ago in July of 2024, that's where we actually got an official announcement at the Capcom Next event that Koshi Nakanishi, the director for Resident Evil 7, was working on a future Resident Evil game. So that kind of brings us to the topic of today, right? I mean, a lot of people kind of assumed that he was just referring to RE9, but as I've stated in other videos, it could very well be that he was stating something else. And by the way, if you guys want to know what my theory is, and you guys are enjoying the video, make sure to leave a like and also consider subscribing. It helps out a ton. But going back to what I was saying, my theory is that it could also be, now again, this is pure speculation, but what if Koshi Nakanishi was working on Revelations 3? And why would I say that? Like, where is this coming from, you might be asking? Well, what's funny about Koshi Nakanishi is that he didn't just direct Resident Evil 7. He also directed Resident Evil Mercenaries 3D, and on top of that, he also, get this, he also directed Resident Evil Revelations, which is kind of out there, right? Like it is kind of out there. Like, I ain't gonna lie. So, and it's funny because we are gonna be streaming that later on, right? Just in a couple of minutes. But that's super wild. And if we go back to the data breach, as mentioned, there was 3 games that we still haven't seen yet: Resident Evil Hunku, Resident Evil Apocalypse, and Resident Evil Outrage. What's interesting about Outrage is that there was a rumor kind of flying around. There was actually 2 rumors, and I'll get to them right now. The first rumor was that Resident Evil Outrage was in fact Resident Evil Revelations 3, and it was going to be a Nintendo exclusive. The second rumor that was also attached to Outrage was that Outrage was actually going to be a multiplayer Resident Evil game. So again, I don't believe in rumors, but I do find it very suspicious that Koshi Nakanishi, the director of Resident Evil Revelations, is actually and Resident Evil 7 is also going to be working and is confirmed to be working on the new Resident Evil game. Now, one counter argument to this theory, this speculation that I have, is Koshi Nakanishi in the Capcom Next event said that he specifically stated, and I do have to pull up the quote exactly because I don't remember it, but he did say in terms like roughly that it was very hard for him to come up with something that he was going to do for the future of Resident Evil after the events of Resident Evil 8. Like, it was really hard for him to come up with the next Resident Evil game. Now, one could interpret what he was saying here as something that, you know, that he was obviously working on Resident Evil 9 because, you know, that's the future of Resident Evil. But it could be that you could also interpret what he's saying there as this being a new spin-off game and him kind of doing something new with the Resident Evil series. And there's actually evidence to support this theory that I have. For example, Koshi Nakanishi has worked on Resident Evil 7, Resident Evil Mercenaries 3D, and also Resident Evil Revelations. Well, 2 of those games, Resident Evil Revelations and Resident Evil 7, one could argue that those were, I mean, we know that Revelations is a spinoff, but Resident Evil 7 was kind of a reboot to the series. And one could argue that it is kind of a spinoff because it's so different from the rest of Resident Evil games, right? Like, there's no other game out there that's exactly one-to-one like Resident Evil 7. You could look to Resident Evil 8, but even Resident Evil 7 fans don't even like Resident Evil 8 because it's so different and it's more similar to RE4 Remake. This is also a point that I bring up a lot when people say that Resident Evil 7 is like the greatest Resident Evil game. And I'm like, bro, Resident Evil 7 is like nothing. Is like, there's no other game in the series that's similar to Resident Evil 7 except Resident Evil 8. And they're very different. But going back to what I was saying, it could be that Koshi Nakanishi is actually working on Revelations 3. Mind you, it has been 10 years since Capcom has actually released a Revelations game, right? The last time we got it was Revelations 2, which released in 2015. So what if the reason that Capcom didn't showcase anything at the Nintendo Direct was because they're actually cooking up this game, right? They're basically working hard on this game and they don't want to release or even announce anything because they're still at work. I mean, that's kind of the vibe that Koshi was kind of telling us a year ago. He basically said the way he finished the interview off in that Capcom Next event was he's like, you know, right now we can't show you anything, but I'm excited to show you stuff when we can. And that's how the Capcom, that's how that section of the Capcom Next event finished. Now, one thing that I didn't mention before is that the rumor that was attached to Resident Evil Outrage, which we know is a true game that was being worked on during the events of, or during 2020, is that the rumor that was attached was Rebecca, that it was actually going to be a game about Rebecca going through a bio incident in her university. That's what the rumor was. Again, it's just a rumor. Now, if you guys know me, you guys know, most likely know, that I do not believe in rumors. By the way, guys, this is me from the future, and I did want to specify something that I didn't really make clear while I was shooting this video live. Now, the only reason that I'm mentioning this to you guys is just so that you guys know that this was just a rumor that was said years ago. Now, do I believe it? Hell no. Okay, I don't believe rumors. I've been a clear advocate since basically the start of my channel, which we're going on 4 years now, that I do not trust rumors, and neither should you. I've always been somebody that stated that, as opposed to other Resident Evil YouTubers that love to foment that, aka they love to encourage that sort of behavior. And I guess another reason to also mention is just to make a clear distinction that what I'm doing here in this video is this is a theory. This is speculation on my part that's based on concrete information that we've had thanks to the 2020 data breach. The only thing here is that I'm just theorizing. And there's a very clear distinction to that, as opposed to just making up rumors that have no basis in reality. Anyways, that's something that I forgot to mention, but let's go back to the initial video. It would make sense if Capcom was working on a new Revelations game. It's been a long time. It kind of brings me up to the next part of the video, which is like, is Capcom going to be porting their Resident Evil games? Yes. Yes, I 100% believe that. And this is actually something that I stated when we streamed the Nintendo Direct. You know, it's a no-brainer that Capcom is still going to be working on posting a lot of their games on as many platforms as possible. So are we going to be able to see the remakes like 1, 2, 3, and 4, and as well as 7 on the new Switch 2? Yeah, I like it's a no-brainer, dude. Like, how many times have they ported RE5 and RE6 or like OG RE4? You know what I mean? Like, Capcom is definitely going to do that, but it's just weird, right? It's just sus that Capcom didn't do that during like the Nintendo Direct, which so many eyeballs, like they had like 1 million people there that were watching the Direct, right? Like, that's weird that they didn't do that. Anyways, click this video if you guys want to watch my Resident Evil in 2025 video, where we actually go over a bunch of the rumors with the virus. So make sure to go watch that video if you guys enjoyed this one, and thank you so much for watching.